It started with a letter, a quiet, unassuming envelope, hand-delivered to Clarence's house, that no one thought would ever see the light of day. Inside, a name had been written in bold, black ink, a name that immediately made even the most composed palace aides pause and swallow hard. Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex. The woman who had once captivated the world, whose every smile and wave had been dissected by millions of cameras, whose every step had been chronicled in tabloids and social media, now suddenly linked to whispers darker than anyone had dared imagine. And not just whispers, allegations, connections to some of the most notorious figures in recent history. A name that carried a weight of suspicion so heavy that even King Charles himself reportedly trembled as he read it. Could it be true? Was this the scandal that would finally shatter the carefully curated image of the Sussexes? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. You might be asking yourself, how could this happen? How could someone married into the British royal family, someone who had promised to uphold dignity, tradition, and respect, be dragged into a storm that smelled of secrecy, power, and darkness? These are questions that every royal watcher, every gossip columnist, and every casual observer of the palace halls has been asking for weeks. But the answers, as we are about to explore, are far more shocking than you could possibly imagine. And the implications are staggering, not just for Meghan, but for Prince Harry, for the monarchy, and for anyone who ever thought that privilege could shield someone from consequences. The day King Charles made his announcement, the world seemed to stop. Newspapers around the globe ran screaming headlines. Meghan Markle permanently stripped of royal title, palace in crisis as Duchess faces allegations, royal family in turmoil. Social media erupted. Tweets and posts, memes and rants flooded every feed. Some were outraged, others shocked, and some laughed nervously, unsure whether to believe the story or dismiss it as another sensationalist palace rumor. And in the middle of it all stood Meghan Markle, a woman who had once wielded power, influence, and charm with the deftness of a master strategist, now seemingly on the precipice of a disaster that could define her legacy forever. The timing, many palace insiders argue, was critical. This was not merely a personal or family matter. It was a statement. King Charles, it seemed, had reached the end of his patience. There had been whispers in the corridors of Buckingham Palace for months. Conversations behind closed doors. Private meetings that the public would never hear about. Advisors and aides muttering about behavior that cannot be ignored, decisions that put the monarchy at risk, and connections that cannot be overlooked. And then came the letter that changed everything. The spark that ignited a chain reaction, culminating in a decision so final that the palace had prepared for weeks to manage the fallout. But before we dive into the full story, let's pause for a moment and ask, what does it really mean to be stripped of a royal title permanently? For Meghan Markle, it's not just the loss of a name, a privilege, or a ceremonial status. It's the symbolic severing from one of the most scrutinized, historic institutions in the world. It's a signal to the world that no amount of fame, influence, or media-savvy maneuvering can protect someone from the consequences of their actions or alleged actions. And for the monarchy, it's a statement that even those who seem untouchable, even those who have married into the most powerful family in the world, are not immune to accountability. The stakes, therefore, could not be higher. Imagine for a moment being Meghan, a woman who captured hearts with her charm, who navigated royal protocol with grace, who faced relentless media scrutiny with a poised smile, and yet now finds herself at the center of one of the most explosive scandals the monarchy has faced in decades. One that involves not just public opinion, but allegations tying her to one of the most infamous figures in modern history, Jeffrey Epstein. A name that evokes secrecy, exploitation, and scandal on an international scale. And for the public, for millions of people around the world, the intrigue is irresistible. How did this happen? Was she complicit? Or was she manipulated, caught in a web far larger than herself? From the moment the announcement hit the press, the palace began to brace for impact. Security tightened, statements were drafted, social media teams scrambled, and advisors raced to anticipate the questions that were already flooding inboxes. The decision was unprecedented. No royal in recent memory Let's pause for a moment to grasp the magnitude. Epstein was not just another controversial figure. He was a man whose actions had sent shockwaves through international politics, high society, and legal systems. Allegations of exploitation, trafficking, and manipulation had followed him for decades, leaving a trail of victims, secret networks, and powerful connections. To be linked, even indirectly, to Epstein was to invite scrutiny, suspicion, and intense public outrage. And yet, that link appeared repeatedly in Meghan's private communications, travel logs, and event invitations. Insiders report that the first hints came through what seemed at the time to be innocuous invitations. Private parties, charity events, and social gatherings where Epstein's name was present in the guest lists. Initially, palace staff dismissed these mentions as coincidences. After all, in elite social circles, many names overlap. But as the team dug deeper, patterns emerged. Emails revealed repeated interactions, introductions, and exchanges that could not be easily explained away. A once simple assumption, that Meghan was merely attending high-profile events, was replaced with a disturbing question: what was her true relationship with this man, and what did it mean for the royal family? One particularly troubling piece of evidence came in the form of a seemingly routine email chain. Sent between Meghan's former advisors, it referenced Jeffrey in passing, along with discussions about certain parties and private meetings. At first glance, the content seemed harmless. But the more the palace examined the metadata, the more inconsistencies surfaced. Dates didn't match up, locations were vague or untraceable, and certain attachments, deleted and then recovered, suggested that more was happening behind the scenes than anyone had realized. For palace officials, the discovery was like uncovering a hidden layer beneath a perfectly polished surface. What had seemed innocent was now laced with questions, ambiguity, and concern. But the intrigue didn't stop there. According to insiders, investigators found travel logs indicating Meghan's attendance at certain events with connections to Epstein-linked figures. Flights, hotel stays, and private gatherings painted a picture that was difficult to ignore. And while attendance alone is not proof of wrongdoing, in the context of repeated interactions and unexplained meetings, it became a red flag too significant to dismiss. Questions multiplied. Did Meghan knowingly associate with these individuals? Was she aware of Epstein's broader network and activities? And most importantly, what had she shared with Prince Harry, and what had she concealed? The palace's legal team, already on high alert, reportedly began to pull in outside counsel. They understood that the mere appearance of impropriety could be catastrophic, both for Meghan and for the monarchy. Public perception, after all, is as powerful as truth in the court of global opinion. Even a hint of involvement with Epstein risked undermining decades of careful image building and protocol enforcement. Every document, every email, and every recovered message had to be scrutinized with painstaking detail. There was no room for oversight. Every detail mattered. The more palace officials investigated, the more alarming the connections appeared. Some meetings coincided with social events hosted by Epstein or his associates. Some invitations referenced private charities or fundraising events known to be linked to his circle. And in at least one email chain, a code name was used, a euphemism that investigators interpreted as a veiled reference to a particular gathering. These were the kinds of discoveries that made the most experienced aides sit back and quietly shake their heads. They had seen scandals before, but the implications of an Epstein link were entirely different. Meanwhile, the public remained blissfully unaware, or at least partially so. The mainstream media had yet to catch wind of these details. Rumors circulated online, but nothing concrete had emerged. And this is precisely what made the situation so combustible. The palace knew that once these connections became public, the backlash would be instantaneous, ferocious, and unavoidable. The damage would not just be to Meghan's reputation, but to the very credibility of the monarchy itself. Prince Harry's reaction, according to insiders, was a mixture of shock, disbelief, and anger. Reports indicate he struggled to reconcile the woman he loved and defended with the emerging evidence suggesting troubling associations. The tension between loyalty to his wife and duty to his family created a storm of internal conflict. He faced an impossible choice: continue to defend her publicly and risk the monarchy's reputation, or accept the unfolding evidence and act in alignment with the king's decision. The emotional toll was immense, and for Harry, the implications were deeply personal. Even more troubling for the palace was the potential for legal scrutiny. Epstein's network, though partially dismantled, was extensive. Connections, both direct and indirect, could have ramifications across jurisdictions. Emails, travel records, and financial documentation could be subpoenaed. And if Meghan's interactions with any of Epstein's associates were interpreted as more than social, legal consequences could follow. Consequences that would thrust the royal family into uncharted territory. Insiders also point to an eerie coincidence. Certain meetings and travel arrangements coincided with events known to involve Epstein's most controversial associates. Dates lined up, locations overlapped, and in some cases, communications suggested prior knowledge of who would be present. These patterns could not be dismissed as mere coincidence. And for King Charles, the realization was sobering. The decision he faced was not just about protocol, it was about risk management at the highest level. One misstep could have international consequences, tarnish decades of tradition, and permanently stain the monarchy's image. Yet, even amidst the shock, there were unanswered questions. How much did Meghan know? Was she ever directly implicated in any illegal activity, or was this a matter of association? Could someone of her stature really be unaware of the implications of her social circle? And how would the public, already divided in opinion about the Sussexes, react once more details emerged? These were not trivial considerations. They were questions that demanded answers before any official action could be taken. The palace reportedly conducted multiple rounds of interviews, collecting statements from advisors, former aides, and even social contacts. Patterns emerged, contradictions were noted, and timelines were reconstructed with painstaking precision. Every interaction, no matter how small, was analyzed for potential implications. And slowly, a picture began to emerge, a network of interactions, some perhaps innocent, others potentially compromising, that tied Meghan Markle, in some way, to figures connected to Epstein's world. As investigators dug deeper, one name surfaced repeatedly in internal correspondence. A former associate of Epstein who had remained largely out of public view, but was now linked to certain events in Meghan's past. The connection was tenuous on paper, but the palace understood that perception often outweighs reality in public opinion. Even the hint of association could be catastrophic. And for King Charles, it was a signal. Decisive action was necessary to preserve the monarchy's integrity, no matter how painful or controversial. And then came a revelation that would send shockwaves through the palace. Among the recovered documents was a communication suggesting Meghan had been introduced to a member of Epstein's network in a private setting, one that had previously gone unnoticed. It was a small detail, easily missed, but when cross-referenced with other information, it painted a picture that was far more troubling than anyone had anticipated. The palace realized that delay was no longer an option. The evidence, subtle though it was, demanded immediate action. The tension was palpable. Advisors debated, aides whispered, and the king weighed every possible outcome. The potential fallout was immense. Public backlash, media scrutiny, family tension, legal complications. And yet, the moment for a decision had arrived. King Charles reportedly made one final review of the evidence, considered the risks, and prepared for the announcement that would alter the course of royal history. And the cliffhanger. Just when it seemed the Epstein connection had been fully documented and understood, palace investigators discovered something far more shocking. An email trail so cryptic, so revealing, that it threatened to expose not just Meghan, but a network of hidden interactions no one outside the palace had ever known. The palace has always been a place of tradition, hierarchy, and strict rules, a world where every glance, every word, and every action carries weight far beyond its surface. But behind the gilded doors, behind the ceremonial splendor and curated public image, there exists a world few ever see. A world of whispers, secret meetings, hidden agendas, and loyalties tested in silence. And it was inside this hidden palace world that the Meghan Markle storm was beginning to rage. It started with the aides. Long-serving staff who had dedicated decades to serving the royal family, who had witnessed scandals, divorces, and public controversies, now found themselves caught in an unprecedented maelstrom. Conversations that once revolved around schedules, events, and proper protocol now centered on the Duchess of Sussex, her private communications, and the explosive documents that had emerged. "I've never seen anything like this," one palace insider reportedly confided, their voice trembling with a mixture of fear and disbelief. "Not even the worst crises of the past come close to this." The atmosphere behind palace walls was tense, almost electric. Secretaries whispered in hallways, but their words carried weight, rippling through staff networks like shockwaves. Security teams worked overtime, monitoring movements, vetting visitors, and scanning communications. The king's advisors huddled in small, private rooms, reviewing emails, flight logs, and travel itineraries. Every document was examined, every discrepancy questioned, every unexplained meeting analyzed. The sheer volume of information was overwhelming. Some staff began to worry that the scandal could unravel in unpredictable ways, exposing more than even the palace was prepared to handle. What made the situation even more precarious was the conflicting loyalties. Staff were torn between personal feelings and professional duty. Many had grown fond of Meghan, admired her poise, and believed in her public persona. Yet, the documents, the emails, and the connections suggested something far more complex. Was she a victim of circumstances, or a willing participant in a network that threatened the monarchy's integrity? These questions created a quiet, simmering tension among palace staff, one that no handbook or training could have prepared them for. Insiders also reported that certain staff members were tasked with investigating the origins of the documents, tracing them through digital trails, recovering deleted emails, and cross-referencing social connections. They worked tirelessly, often late into the night, under immense pressure. And as they dug deeper, inconsistencies emerged. Meetings that had been casually mentioned in schedules suddenly took on sinister undertones. Invitations that seemed routine were revealed to have occurred in private locations with notable individuals whose names carried reputational risk. Every layer peeled back brought with it more questions, more uncertainty, and more fear. Meanwhile, the palace hierarchy itself faced strain. King Charles, as the head of the family and the ultimate authority, was tasked with balancing public duty and private judgment. Advisors debated whether to address the emerging issues internally or prepare a public statement. Legal counsel argued about timing, wording, and potential fallout. Communications teams tried to anticipate media narratives, already sensing the inevitable scrutiny that would accompany the revelation of Meghan's connections. And through it all, the royal family's reputation hung in delicate balance, each decision carrying the potential to stabilize or destabilize centuries of tradition. One of the most fascinating aspects of this chapter of events was how quickly whispers spread within palace walls. A maid might overhear a conversation in a side corridor. A security officer might notice an unusual meeting in a private room. A secretary could stumble upon a confusing reference in an email chain. Each observation, each seemingly minor detail, was shared cautiously but urgently, creating a chain of intelligence that moved through palace networks like an underground current. The collective realization began to dawn. Whatever Meghan Markle's intentions, her actions, or alleged associations, had created a crisis that could not be contained quietly. The aide's fear was compounded by the fact that the palace operates in a world of appearances. Every word, every gesture, every leak could have consequences. Unlike in ordinary workplaces, information travels far beyond the immediate environment, amplified by media, public interest, and social perception. For staff, the pressure was enormous, to maintain discretion while grappling with a story that could alter the monarchy forever. The sense of being watched, judged, and implicated created an invisible tension that hung over every conversation and decision. And then there were the leaks. While the palace sought to maintain control, some details inevitably escaped. Anonymous sources hinted at emails, event attendance, and private communications that were raising eyebrows. Rumors began circulating among journalists and social media commentators. Though much of it was speculative, insiders understood that even partial truths could generate massive public fallout. The palace, meticulous as it was, recognized that perception was just as powerful as fact, and they had to manage both simultaneously. The personal element cannot be overstated. Staff reportedly expressed fear for their own reputations, anxious that involvement, even as witnesses or intermediaries, could implicate them. Several aides confided that they felt trapped, caught between loyalty to the family and the relentless pressure of managing a story that had potential global consequences. It wasn't just the headline-grabbing details that caused stress. It was the sense that history was watching, that every misstep could be amplified, and that the smallest error could be catastrophic. Within this tense environment, one aide reportedly uncovered a particularly concerning detail. A hidden file in Meghan's personal communications that suggested the Duchess had knowledge of, and possibly engagement with, individuals connected to a highly controversial social circle. While the specifics were opaque, the implication was undeniable. The palace was dealing with a situation that involved more than simple public perception. It involved potential risk, both reputational and legal. The aide's discovery triggered a flurry of activity behind the walls, as teams worked tirelessly to trace the origin, context, and significance of the file. King Charles, reportedly briefed in real time, understood the stakes. He faced a decision that required balancing public duty, family loyalty, and the long-term health of the monarchy. Advisors provided assessments, legal teams outlined potential consequences, and communications experts prepared contingencies. Every action had to be measured, calculated, and precise. And yet, despite the extensive planning, the emotional weight of the situation could not be mitigated. The knowledge that someone married into the royal family might be linked, even indirectly, to controversial figures created a storm of tension, both personal and institutional. At the same time, the emotional toll on those within the palace was profound. Staff members who had dedicated their lives to serving the monarchy struggled with feelings of anger, disappointment, and moral conflict. Many felt betrayed by the unfolding revelations, while others worried about the broader implications for the royal family. Conversations in private quarters were punctuated by frustration and disbelief. Some aides confided that they could hardly sleep, haunted by the details emerging behind palace walls. The palace's secrecy mechanisms, designed to prevent leaks, were tested like never before. Every phone, every email, every internal memo had to be scrutinized for potential breaches. Security protocols were tightened. Access to certain files was restricted. And yet, in a building where history, hierarchy, and tradition collide, controlling information is never simple. The palace staff had to navigate a delicate balance. Ensure the integrity of internal investigations while managing the emotional, social, and political ramifications of a scandal that was already rippling outward. Through it all, Meghan Markle remained a presence that loomed over the palace. Her absence in certain meetings, her public statements, and her private communications all became points of intense scrutiny. Staff reported a mixture of curiosity, frustration, and fear when discussing her name. Every detail about her lifestyle, choices, and social connections was analyzed for potential insight into the broader network of associations that had alarmed the king and his advisors. And finally, the mini cliffhanger. As palace investigators delved deeper into Meghan's hidden files, one discovery stood out above all others. A single email, buried among thousands, suggested a connection so unexpected, so potentially explosive, that even seasoned aides hesitated before bringing it to the king's attention. One whispered to another, "If this gets out, no one will ever recover from it." The word firestorm doesn't begin to capture what was about to unfold. Behind the pristine facade of Buckingham Palace, behind the carefully manicured gardens and golden chandeliers, the wheels of a legal machine had already begun to turn. The moment the documents linking Meghan Markle to controversial networks and social circles surfaced, palace lawyers sprang into action, assembling a team that would operate with precision, secrecy, and urgency. For the king and his advisors, this was no longer just a matter of reputation. It was a matter of law, of liability, and of potential international consequences. The first step, according to insiders, was to evaluate the scope of the legal exposure. Every email, Every invitation, every flight record, and every financial document was meticulously examined. Lawyers cross-referenced dates and locations, scrutinized correspondence, and verified connections. Their goal was simple: identify any potential breach of law or protocol and prepare a defensible strategy for the palace. But the deeper they dug, the more troubling the picture became. Connections that at first seemed peripheral were anything but. Patterns emerged: frequent interactions, private meetings, and hidden financial arrangements that suggested more than mere coincidence. For palace legal counsel, the stakes were enormous. Any hint of impropriety could not only damage Meghan personally, but could expose the monarchy to legal scrutiny, both domestically and internationally. The United Kingdom's royal protocols, while steeped in tradition, intersected with civil and criminal law in complex ways. Advisors knew that even minor missteps could escalate into litigation, media inquiries, and government investigations. And in Meghan's case, the potential implications stretched beyond the UK, reaching across the Atlantic, entangling parties in the United States, and potentially intersecting with law enforcement agencies familiar with controversial figures in Epstein's orbit. Prince Harry, caught in the middle, reportedly became aware of the legal storm almost immediately. He faced an impossible dilemma: defend his wife publicly, risking the monarchy's credibility, or trust the palace counsel and acknowledge the gravity of the situation. Sources suggest he oscillated between loyalty, anger, and disbelief, grappling with the reality that the woman he loved might be entangled in matters with far-reaching legal implications. Emotional stress compounded the practical challenges. Harry reportedly spent hours in private consultation with advisors, weighing his options while under intense scrutiny from the press and public. The legal teams began drafting contingency plans, preparing for every imaginable scenario. They anticipated questions from the media, inquiries from government officials, and even potential civil litigation. They modeled the outcomes of various public statements and private communications. Their work was painstaking, methodical, and exhaustive. Every detail mattered because, in the world of the monarchy, perception often carries as much weight as fact. One misstatement, one misstep, could trigger a cascade of negative publicity and legal exposure. Meanwhile, Meghan's own legal counsel became involved, pushing back against allegations, defending her public image, and seeking to control the narrative. Confidential negotiations, internal memos, and correspondence flowed between the two teams. The palace lawyers were tasked with protecting the institution, while Meghan's lawyers sought to shield her personally and professionally. This clash of interests added another layer of complexity to an already volatile situation. Tensions between teams escalated, and the palace began to feel the strain of what insiders referred to as the perfect storm, a collision of reputation, law, and family loyalty. Part of the legal review focused on financial transactions. Advisors examined bank records, investment accounts, charitable donations, and other financial documents for any indication of irregularities. Even a seemingly small, unexplained transaction could be interpreted as evidence of impropriety, raising questions about transparency, ethics, and compliance with both royal protocol and local laws. Each discovery prompted urgent meetings, debates, and consultations, as the palace worked to ensure that no stone was left unturned. The pressure was immense. Advisors and staff reported sleepless nights, working under constant scrutiny while navigating the emotional stakes. Every email, every meeting, every conversation had to be carefully considered. Miscommunication could have disastrous consequences. One aide reportedly admitted to feeling trapped. "You can't tell anyone, you can't act publicly, but the tension is unbearable. Everyone is on edge." This emotional stress, combined with the legal pressure, created an environment where even small errors could be magnified into crises. Then came the international dimension. As Meghan's alleged connections surfaced, U.S. legal experts were consulted to assess potential implications in American jurisdictions. Could there be grounds for investigation under U.S. law? What about previous associates or interactions with individuals under legal scrutiny? The palace legal team realized that this was not just a domestic issue. It had transatlantic consequences, raising the stakes exponentially. Advice from U.S. attorneys, combined with intelligence from private investigators, fed into the palace's overall strategy, ensuring that every possible legal angle was addressed before making any public announcement. At the same time, media scrutiny intensified. Journalists with deep knowledge of the Epstein network began probing Meghan's past, looking for inconsistencies, gaps, or evidence of interaction. Social media, already abuzz with speculation, magnified every rumor, leak, and allegation. The palace legal team understood that controlling the narrative was as critical as the legal review itself. Every statement had to be precise, every interaction carefully measured, and every potential leak anticipated. In this environment, a single misstep could trigger a global media frenzy. For King Charles, the legal firestorm was deeply personal. He had always sought to uphold the integrity and dignity of the monarchy. He understood that a scandal of this magnitude threatened not only public trust, but the very institution he had dedicated his life to protecting. His advisors presented options: delay, mitigate, negotiate, or act decisively. After careful consideration, it became clear that decisive action was necessary. The monarchy could not appear hesitant, uncertain, or permissive in the face of such explosive allegations. The king's choice would send a signal: the royal family adheres to standards, regardless of fame, influence, or public perception. Even within the palace, emotions ran high. Staff reported hushed conversations, whispered fears, and moments of near panic. Some aides felt sympathy for Meghan, believing that she was caught in circumstances beyond her control. Others were frustrated, feeling that her actions, or alleged actions, had jeopardized everyone around her. And amidst this tension, Prince Harry struggled with his own emotions, reportedly caught between protecting his wife and accepting the realities outlined by Palace Council. But perhaps the most dramatic element of this chapter came from the documentation itself. Emails, travel logs, and private communications revealed inconsistencies, hidden meetings, and unexplained associations that, when pieced together, suggested a level of involvement far beyond casual acquaintance. For palace lawyers, these details were both alarming and urgent. Each revelation required rapid assessment, strategic consultation, and immediate preparation for potential consequences. And then came the moment of truth. The palace prepared for a public announcement. The decision had been made, the legal analysis completed, and the messaging carefully crafted. King Charles would act decisively, permanently stripping Meghan Markle of her royal title. The legal firestorm, which had begun quietly behind palace walls, was about to become public, and the world would watch every reaction, dissect every word, and scrutinize every implication. But the cliffhanger: just as the announcement was being finalized, palace investigators discovered one more document. An encrypted file, hidden deep within Meghan's private communications, hinting at associations and arrangements that no one had yet anticipated. It started slowly at first. A few tweets, a handful of news articles, murmurs on Instagram and Facebook. But in the age of social media, a spark is all it takes to ignite a wildfire. Within hours, the story of Meghan Markle's alleged connections, her link to controversial figures, and King Charles's decision to strip her of her royal title had erupted into a global frenzy. The palace, so accustomed to careful management of information, suddenly found itself navigating a storm it had long feared: public outrage on an unprecedented scale. Across the world, people reacted with shock, disbelief, anger, and in some cases, schadenfreude. Social media feeds overflowed with hashtags, trending phrases, and viral posts. Hashtag royal scandal, hashtag Meghan exposed, hashtag King Charles decides, all became rallying cries for public opinion. Every post, every meme, every shared article carried the emotional weight of millions of individual judgments. And in the midst of it, journalists scrambled to report, speculate, and analyze, often amplifying the outrage in the process. The initial wave of reaction was almost primal. Many expressed anger at Meghan personally, criticizing her actions, questioning her judgment, and speculating on the depth of her involvement in the Epstein-linked social network. Others targeted the monarchy itself, questioning how such a situation could occur under the careful oversight of centuries of tradition. Public discourse was polarized. Some defended the Duchess, claiming she was a victim of circumstance and media sensationalism, while others saw this as undeniable proof that privilege and fame do not absolve responsibility. In the United Kingdom, tabloids ran headlines that would make the average reader gasp. Duchess in crisis, royal title stripped, scandal rocks monarchy, Meghan Markle and the secret connection. Each headline was carefully crafted to evoke emotion, curiosity, and outrage. Outside the UK, international media followed suit. From New York to Sydney, from Paris to Tokyo, newspapers and digital platforms dissected every detail of the announcement, adding their own commentary, speculation, and analysis. For many, it felt like the world had stopped, all eyes focused on one woman and one unprecedented royal decision. On social media, the reactions were instantaneous and intense. Memes appeared within minutes of the news breaking. Some depicted Meghan as a cunning figure plotting in the shadows. Others portrayed King Charles as the ultimate authority, restoring order. Comment sections overflowed with opinions, accusations, and debates. Fans of the Sussexes attempted to defend her, citing years of media bias, relentless scrutiny, and public vilification. Critics, however, countered with references to the documents, the alleged meetings, and the hidden communications, arguing that the evidence spoke for itself. The emotional tone of the outrage was both visceral and relentless. The palace staff, already tense from internal investigations, now faced the challenge of managing this public explosion. Communications teams worked around the clock to monitor sentiment, craft official statements, and respond to inquiries, all while maintaining a delicate balance between transparency and control. Every word mattered. Every misstep could be magnified, distorted, and disseminated across countless platforms. The public, it seemed, had never been more engaged or more divided. For Prince Harry, the public outrage was a personal nightmare. Supporters of Meghan flooded social media with defiant messages, while detractors lambasted him alongside his wife. He faced intense pressure to respond, to defend, and to navigate the complex web of familial loyalty, public perception, and personal emotion. Sources suggest he felt trapped between two worlds. A world of duty to his family and monarchy, and a world of love, loyalty, and personal devotion. Every public statement, every appearance, carried the potential for further controversy. Even private citizens became actors in this unfolding drama. Individuals who had never paid much attention to the royal family found themselves swept up in the frenzy, debating details, sharing evidence, and forming strong opinions. Forums, chat groups, and comment threads buzzed with speculation, often drawing conclusions from incomplete information. The story had transcended traditional media channels, becoming a viral phenomenon that engaged people emotionally, morally, and psychologically. The outrage was compounded by the nature of the allegations. Connections to controversial figures, alleged secrecy, and questions about judgment touched on fundamental values of trust, morality, and accountability. People weren't just reacting to Meghan's actions. They were reacting to the possibility that someone of immense privilege, married into one of the most respected institutions in the world, might have knowingly associated with figures who represented everything that is morally reprehensible. Emotional responses ranged from anger and disbelief to fear and moral indignation. Insiders reported that the palace began to monitor social media in real time, analyzing patterns, identifying potential misinformation, and preparing counterstatements. They recognized that public perception could be as impactful as legal or internal consequences. Misinformation, rumors, or speculative interpretations could quickly spiral out of control, amplifying outrage and creating crises that the palace would have to manage carefully. Even seasoned aides admitted that they had never seen anything like this level of global attention, nor a public reaction so instant, intense, and emotionally charged. As outrage grew, journalists began uncovering additional details, often pushing the boundaries of what the palace wished to reveal. Alleged emails, event attendance, and cryptic social media posts were analyzed with forensic precision. Every detail was magnified. The public was obsessed, tracing patterns, cross-referencing information, and sharing evidence in real time. Memes, videos, and opinion pieces proliferated, creating a feedback loop of outrage that seemed impossible to contain. Yet, Even amidst the chaos, there were unexpected moments of empathy. Some commentators expressed understanding for Meghan, noting the immense pressure, isolation, and scrutiny she faced. Others highlighted the human element, pointing to Prince Harry's difficult position, the emotional toll on staff, and the complex dynamics of family, loyalty, and duty. These nuances, however, were often drowned out by the louder, more sensational reactions that dominated headlines and social media feeds. The palace, meanwhile, recognized that this outrage could have long-term consequences. Public trust, institutional credibility, and international reputation were all at stake. Every decision, every statement, and every action needed to be measured against potential fallout. The legal and communications teams worked tirelessly, coordinating messaging, drafting responses, and preparing for interviews, press releases, and potential crises that could emerge at any moment. And then came the tipping point. A viral post, shared across multiple platforms, depicted a previously unseen image of Meghan with a controversial figure connected to the network under investigation. The post alone generated millions of interactions, sparking outrage, debate, and widespread media coverage. Public opinion began to solidify, forming a wave of judgment that threatened to drown any narrative of defense or nuance. The palace, already on high alert, realized that the story was no longer controllable. It had taken on a life of its own. The emotional impact on the staff and royal family was profound. Some aides reportedly cried in private, overwhelmed by the intensity of public scrutiny. Others expressed anger, feeling that decades of service and loyalty were being overshadowed by the actions of a single member of the family. Prince Harry, caught between defending his wife and preserving the integrity of the monarchy, reportedly retreated into private discussions, weighing his options while the public spectacle intensified. But perhaps the most revealing aspect of this explosion was the way it exposed contradictions in perception versus reality. Some members of the public, having only seen the curated image of Meghan, were shocked and outraged. Others, aware of her previous media portrayals and statements, expressed disbelief that the situation had escalated so dramatically. The clash of narratives created a tense, emotionally charged environment where truth, perception, and rumor collided in ways that were impossible to disentangle. And just when it seemed the public outrage had reached its peak, palace investigators discovered something even more alarming. Hidden within Meghan's private communications was a series of documents and emails that suggested interactions not previously known. These interactions, if made public, could dramatically shift the narrative and intensify the backlash. Advisors reportedly rushed to evaluate the potential damage, aware that any leak could trigger another wave of outrage, this time more intense and harder to control. The cliffhanger. One recovered email referenced a meeting that no one outside the palace had anticipated, a meeting that could redefine the entire scandal. One insider whispered, "If the world ever sees this, the outrage will be unstoppable." The moment the news of Meghan Markle's alleged connections and King Charles's decisive action became public, the palace felt a shift that went beyond media scrutiny or social media backlash. It was an internal earthquake, shaking the foundations of family relationships, loyalty, and trust. The royal family, often portrayed as an unshakable institution of tradition and composure, suddenly faced a crisis that cut deeply, emotionally, personally, and politically. And at the center of it all stood Meghan, and by extension, her husband, Prince Harry. For Prince William, the fallout was immediate and raw. Sources suggest that he was initially in disbelief, struggling to reconcile the public image of his sister-in-law with the emerging revelations. He reportedly spent hours in private discussions with aides and advisors, seeking to understand the scope of the situation and the implications for the monarchy. William, who has long been portrayed as the dutiful future king, now found himself navigating a situation fraught with emotional complexity, family loyalty, and public responsibility. The stakes were immense. Every decision could affect not only the reputation of the monarchy, but the personal relationships within the family. Kate Middleton, often regarded as the stabilizing presence in the royal household, reportedly faced her own emotional struggle. Loyal to the family, Yet sympathetic to the intense media scrutiny Meghan had endured over the years, Kate's position was delicate. Advisors note that she attempted to mediate tensions quietly, offering guidance where possible, and ensuring that the younger generation of royals, including Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis, remained shielded from the unfolding scandal. Yet, even with these precautions, the emotional impact of the family fallout was undeniable. Prince Harry, caught in the middle of his father's decisions and his wife's growing scrutiny, faced a crisis of identity and loyalty. Insiders describe a man torn between defending Meghan publicly and honoring the authority of his father, the king. He reportedly experienced sleepless nights, emotional outbursts, and long conversations with trusted confidants, attempting to reconcile his personal devotion to his wife with the escalating realities that threatened to engulf the family. Each day brought new revelations, new pressures, and new public judgment, intensifying the emotional toll. The palace, usually adept at managing both public perception and private disputes, found itself navigating a delicate balancing act. Advisors had to weigh the emotional well-being of individual family members against the necessity of preserving institutional integrity. Every action taken to protect one member of the family could unintentionally harm another. Every private conversation could be leaked, misinterpreted, or taken out of context, amplifying tensions further. The emotional stakes were as high as the legal and public stakes, and palace staff reportedly described the environment as tense, fragile, and volatile. Communication within the family became strained. Reports indicate that conversations between King Charles and Harry were particularly fraught, with the younger prince expressing disbelief and frustration over the pace and handling of the investigation. Words exchanged behind closed doors, meant to clarify or reconcile, often only deepened misunderstandings. Some aides observed Harry storming out of meetings, visibly agitated, while others noted moments of quiet despair where he struggled to process the unfolding events. The personal dynamics, coupled with intense public scrutiny, created a pressure cooker environment that few could endure without emotional strain. Meanwhile, Meghan's absence from family engagements only intensified speculation and tension. Advisors report that her decision to remain largely secluded during the initial fallout was strategic, but it had unintended consequences. Without her presence, conversations about the scandal occurred without her perspective, leaving others to interpret events and communications without context. The absence contributed to rumors, assumptions, and emotional fractures, particularly between Harry and other family members. One particularly dramatic incident reportedly occurred during a private family meeting intended to address the unfolding crisis. Accounts suggest that emotions ran high, voices were raised, and years of simmering tension between certain family members came to the surface. The conversation, which had been planned as a strategy session, devolved into an emotionally charged confrontation, with staff later describing it as one of the most intense private family discussions in decades. The incident highlighted not only the stress of the scandal, but also the complex web of loyalty, trust, and personal feelings that underpinned royal relationships. The younger generation of royals, while largely shielded from the public eye, was not immune to the emotional fallout. Reports suggest that Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis were aware, at least in part, of the tensions surrounding their extended family. Staff took extraordinary measures to protect them from media coverage and to maintain a sense of normalcy, but the undercurrent of familial strain could not be entirely hidden. For the children, the scandal represented an early, intense exposure to the pressures of public life, tradition, and the complexities of family loyalty in the modern age. Beyond immediate family, the fallout extended to extended relations and long-standing advisors. Cousins, distant relatives, and palace aides found themselves navigating a complicated landscape of gossip, responsibility, and ethical considerations. Some were called upon to provide testimony, advice, or support. Others were tasked with monitoring public reactions and assisting in communication strategies. The emotional burden extended far beyond the central family, affecting an entire network of relationships and loyalties. Prince Harry, reportedly, faced the most acute personal conflict. Loyal to Meghan, He grappled with the public perception of the scandal, the personal embarrassment of being caught in the middle, and the need to navigate family relationships with tact and discretion. According to insiders, he spent hours consulting with private advisors, legal experts, and even friends outside the royal circle, trying to determine the best course of action. Each decision carried potential consequences, both personal and institutional, creating an almost unbearable level of pressure. Even within the staff, emotions ran high. Long-serving aides who had navigated previous scandals expressed frustration, anger, and disbelief. Some reportedly expressed empathy for Meghan, noting the relentless media scrutiny she had endured over the years. Others were exasperated at the sheer complexity of the situation and the potential risk it posed to the monarchy. The environment was emotionally charged, a mix of fear, loyalty, and tension that permeated every corner of the palace. Amidst the turmoil, advisors recognized that decisive communication was essential. The king, in consultation with his legal and communications teams, prepared a plan for public statements, private guidance to family members, and crisis management. The goal was to stabilize relationships internally while addressing public perception externally. But even the most carefully laid plans were vulnerable to leaks, emotional outbursts, or unforeseen developments. Every step required precision, discretion, and foresight. And then came the private moment that reportedly crystallized the severity of the fallout. A palace aide, tasked with briefing senior members, reportedly discovered a series of documents and communications that suggested Meghan had been more deeply involved in networks linked to controversial figures than previously realized. The revelation intensified the emotional strain on family members and staff alike. Whispered conversations, hurried consultations, and urgent meetings multiplied as everyone attempted to anticipate the consequences and prepare for the next wave of public and private pressure. The cliffhanger among these hidden communications was one particularly troubling document, a private message hinting at interactions and meetings that no one outside the inner circle had yet seen. One insider reportedly said, "This changes everything. If the family knew the full scope, no one would be the same." The moment the scandal broke, the media smelled blood. What had been a quiet, confidential investigation within the palace walls was now transformed into a public spectacle. Journalists from every corner of the globe mobilized, determined to uncover the story behind Meghan Markle, the alleged connections, and King Charles's unprecedented decision to permanently strip her of her royal title. The hunt was relentless, meticulous, and fueled by the drama of the royal family's inner world. Newsrooms went into overdrive. Editors called urgent meetings to assign reporters to dig deeper, journalists combed through archives, and social media teams tracked viral trends. Every public statement, every historical appearance, and every recorded interaction was suddenly material for investigation. Who had Meghan met? Where had she traveled? What connections could be traced back to controversial figures, including those linked to Jeffrey Epstein? These were the questions that journalists, both seasoned and amateur, demanded answers to, and they weren't willing to wait. Investigative reporters, particularly those with deep knowledge of Epstein's network, pored over flight logs, social calendars, and event photos. They examined previously unnoticed patterns, overlapping events, repeated associations, unexplained invitations. Each clue, no matter how small, was analyzed, cross-referenced, and interpreted for potential significance. A casual meeting at a charity gala, a brief encounter on a private jet, even a fleeting handshake could now be framed as evidence of connections that were both troubling and newsworthy. Social media amplified the intensity of the hunt. Tweets, posts, and videos spread like wildfire, reaching millions in minutes. Memes depicted Meghan in ways that ranged from sympathetic to critical, some portraying her as a manipulative figure, others as a victim of circumstance. Comment threads erupted into debates over morality, responsibility, and loyalty. Public outrage, curiosity, and speculation collided, creating an environment where facts, rumors, and assumptions blurred together. The media, sensing a global audience, pushed relentlessly, eager to be the first to uncover hidden details. Palace staff, aware of the growing frenzy, reportedly took extraordinary measures to maintain confidentiality. Every phone, email, and communication channel was monitored. Security teams were put on high alert, and internal memos emphasized discretion and vigilance. But the very act of containing information only fueled speculation. Reporters and social media sleuths interpreted silence as concealment, gaps in information as proof of wrongdoing, and hesitation as evidence of guilt. The palace, already managing internal tension and family fallout, now had to navigate a global media storm that was accelerating by the hour. Leaked documents, whether intentional or accidental, became a key focus. Journalists who obtained fragments of Meghan's communications quickly pieced together narratives that hinted at controversial associations. Emails discussing meetings, invitations to private gatherings, and subtle references to high-profile individuals created a web of intrigue that the public could not ignore. The investigative hunt wasn't just about facts. It was about crafting a compelling story, a narrative that would captivate audiences and dominate headlines. The pressure on journalists was immense. Every revelation had to be verified, cross-checked, and presented in a way that balanced credibility with dramatic impact. Some reporters went to extraordinary lengths, traveling to locations tied to Meghan's past, interviewing insiders, and reviewing public records. They analyzed photographs, flight logs, and event programs, looking for connections that could validate emerging stories. Even a minor inconsistency could spark suspicion, prompting further investigation and adding to the intensity of the media hunt. Meanwhile, palace officials were in constant communication, managing potential leaks, monitoring media coverage, and preparing responses. The legal team worked closely with communications advisors to craft statements that maintained accuracy while minimizing exposure. But even the most carefully controlled messaging faced scrutiny, with journalists dissecting every word, tone, and nuance for hidden meaning. In this environment, control was difficult to maintain, and the palace found itself reacting to a media landscape that was both unpredictable and unrelenting. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's public relations teams were also under siege. Every appearance, statement, and post on social media was analyzed for clues. Fans and critics alike examined the subtleties of her demeanor, the timing of her messages, and the content of her interviews. Analysts dissected body language, vocal inflection, and the choice of words, searching for indications of guilt, defensiveness, or remorse. The intensity of the media hunt created a constant pressure cooker, with every action potentially amplifying or mitigating the narrative. Investigative journalists uncovered surprising connections that fueled speculation. Past social events, previously considered mundane, were scrutinized for patterns. Private correspondence hinted at interactions that had not been publicly disclosed. Even minor mentions in archival documents were elevated to headline-worthy revelations. Each discovery added another layer of drama, further entangling Meghan Markle in a web of public scrutiny, legal considerations, and palace tension. International media joined the hunt, bringing a global perspective to the story. Outlets in the United States, Europe, and Asia examined every detail, comparing reports, translating documents, and analyzing cultural implications. The narrative was no longer confined to the United Kingdom. It had become an international phenomenon, with audiences everywhere debating morality, loyalty, and power. The scale of the coverage ensured that the story could not be contained, and every revelation intensified both public interest and institutional pressure. Palace insiders report that the media hunt created a new sense of urgency within the royal household. Every day brought new leaks, new reports, and new speculation. Advisors emphasized the importance of preparing for the worst, anticipating how journalists might interpret events, and ensuring that all communications were strategically aligned. The stakes were high. A misstep could amplify public outrage, complicate legal matters, and deepen family tensions. At the same time, the hunt revealed contradictions and surprising facts. Some reports misrepresented details, while others uncovered truths that had been hidden or overlooked. Palace staff had to navigate a constantly shifting landscape of rumor, partial evidence, and speculation. They faced the challenge of correcting misinformation while maintaining secrecy, a delicate and high-pressure balancing act. Prince Harry, reportedly isolated from some decision-making, felt the sting of public interpretation. Every media headline was a test of loyalty, judgment, and emotional resilience. Friends and advisors described him as walking a tightrope, balancing personal devotion to Meghan with the responsibilities and expectations of his position. Each day brought new challenges, as the media hunt intensified and public scrutiny grew more invasive and relentless. And just when it seemed the media hunt had reached its peak, a breakthrough emerged. A previously undisclosed photograph surfaced, depicting Meghan at a private gathering with individuals linked to controversial figures in Epstein's network. The image, quickly circulated online and picked up by major media outlets, added fuel to the already blazing fire. Analysts and commentators dissected every detail: who was present, the timing of the event, and the implications for Meghan and the royal family. The palace, aware of the explosive potential, moved swiftly to manage the fallout, but the story had already taken on a life of its own. The cliffhanger. Among the recovered materials was an encrypted video, previously unknown to investigators, hinting at meetings